Before there was gold, before fiat money, before Bitcoin, there was land. It was the first form of wealth humanity ever recognized. The soil beneath our feet was the original ledger, a natural blockchain written not in code but in territory, borders and blood. Empires were built upon it, wars were fought for it, and civilizations rose and fell according to who controlled it. Every measure of power, every symbol of success, every idea of permanence began with one question: who owns the land? We talk about scarcity today as if it's something new, as if Bitcoin invented the idea of finite value. But land was the first truly scarce asset. You couldn't print more of it, you couldn't replicate it, and no matter how powerful you were, you couldn't create an inch of it out of nothing. You could only conquer it, inherit it, or defend it. Land was the original hard money, finite, tangible, and self-verifying. In ancient Egypt, wealth wasn't measured in coins or jewels. It was measured in acres along the Nile. The fertility of that soil determined who thrived and who starved. Pharaohs didn't hoard gold. They hoarded floodplains. The harvests were liquidity. The grain was capital. Land wasn't just wealth. It was life itself. Centuries later, Rome transformed that same truth into empire. Conquered territories were divided among elites, forming vast estates known as latifundia. These estates weren't just farms, they were economic engines, military resources and social hierarchies all at once. Owning land meant owning labor, law, and legacy. The poor didn't simply lack money. They lacked existence, and when Rome finally collapsed, it left behind not gold or marble, but a system, feudalism. Europe's so-called Dark Ages weren't dark because knowledge was lost. They were dark because ownership was. Kings owned crowns, the church owned lands, and peasants owned nothing. You could work a field your entire life and still die a tenant. Wealth was measured not by how much you produced, but by how long your name stayed on the deed. When people romanticize the sound money of old, they forget that sound money was built on unsound lives. The blockchain of the Middle Ages wasn't digital, it was carved into inheritance, bloodlines, and divine right. Transparent only to the powerful, immutable only for them. Feudalism didn't collapse because it failed, it collapsed because it became too obvious. The merchants rose, the peasants revolted, and a new idea was born: capitalism. But capitalism didn't replace land, it monetized it. Banks began lending against acres, factories were financed by farmland, railroads followed property lines. Even the first government bonds in Britain, the consols, were backed by rents from royal estates. Capitalism simply changed the script. The feudal lord became the landlord, and the serf became the tenant. Ownership was no longer a privilege of birth, but of credit. Yet the hierarchy stayed the same, only the costumes changed. Every new form of wealth humanity has ever invented, gold, stocks, fiat, crypto, is nothing but a reflection of that first principle. Gold was condensed land, mined scarcity. Fiat was land abstracted into paper promises. Bitcoin? It's digital land, finite, mined and defended, not by soldiers but by code. Listen closely to the way Bitcoiners speak. Digital real estate, self-sovereignty, unforgeable property. Every phrase echoes a medieval instinct, the longing for something you can own outright, something immune to kings and taxes, something no one can take. The noble called it a title deed. The miner calls it a private key. The impulse is the same, the dream of permanent ownership. But here's the paradox. Even in the digital world, power still belongs to those who control physical ground. Crypto wealth, stock wealth, paper wealth, all of it eventually seeks refuge in land. When profits rise, investors buy real estate. When inflation hits, people rush to property. When crisis strikes, governments rescue mortgages first. Why? Because beneath every market lies the same foundation: soil. You can't eat Bitcoin. You can't live inside a stock certificate, but you can plant on land, sleep on land, and pass it to your children. That's why, after every crash, every bubble, every digital illusion, humanity runs back to the dirt. Because when everything else burns, the ground remains. This cycle has never changed. It happened after the South Sea bubble, after the Great Depression, after 2008. Every digital boom ends in the same retreat, a flight back to real property. That isn't a coincidence, it's gravity. Land is the one investment that doesn't move, yet everything else moves around it. We like to pretend we've moved beyond it, that we're smarter now, living in an age of data, not dirt. But the truth is, even the world's largest financial systems are still anchored in land. The global real estate market is worth over $380 trillion, more than all stocks and bonds combined. Every currency, Every loan, every act of governance still depends on the ground beneath it. When a government borrows, it borrows against land. When a bank lends, it lends into it. And when a nation collapses, it's the land, not the paper, that survives. Land defines what wealth even means. It is the benchmark of value, the collateral behind civilization itself. We call it a housing market, but it's not a market, it's a filter. The wealthy don't buy homes to live in them. They buy them to store capital. Across London, New York, and Dubai, entire districts sit dark, not neighborhoods, but vaults with skylines. Real estate isn't shelter anymore, it's a savings account made of concrete. Without that system, modern finance would collapse. Mortgages are the hidden engine of liquidity. They turn human dreams into data for credit markets. Interest rates don't just control money, they control who gets to own land. Raise them, the gates close. Lower them, the bidding wars begin. Monetary policy is just land access in disguise. And despite centuries of progress, the rule remains unchanged. The few own, the many rent. The manor house just became a mortgage. The peasant just became a tenant. The feudal chain never broke. It simply learned how to hide in contracts and interest rates. Governments talk about affordable housing, but the truth is, affordability would destroy the system. If everyone could buy land, who would borrow? Who would serve? Scarcity isn't a flaw, it's the design. Land remains the perfect bottleneck, the one asset that guarantees hierarchy. Even today, the top 10% of humanity owns more than 85% of global land value. That isn't evolution, that's feudalism with better branding. And yet, in a strange twist of history, digital assets like Bitcoin were born from that same instinct, the hunger to escape control. But over time, even Bitcoin began to mirror what it opposed. Early adopters became the new landlords of cyberspace, mining first, accumulating most, and renting out their holdings through platforms and exchanges. The dream of freedom turned into another pyramid. Scarcity once again concentrated at the top. And what did the winners do when the profits came? They cashed out into land. Crypto wealth became condos. Tokens became titles. Because no matter how virtual the fortune, the exit is always physical. Even Bitcoin, for all its brilliance, still depends on geography, on data centers, electricity, and hardware, all anchored in real-world territory. Its freedom is built on the same soil it tried to transcend. That's the ultimate irony of civilization. No matter how digital we become, every empire still ends up measured in acres. The Romans had provinces. The British had colonies. Today, corporations have data centers, warehouses, and campuses. The battlefield has changed, but the stakes haven't. Because power, real power, has always been territorial. And that brings us here, to the silent empire of the 21st century, the empire of real estate trusts, sovereign wealth funds, and corporate landlords, quietly buying the planet, acre by acre, while the ordinary person grows more landless than ever before. Owning a home has become the new border between inclusion and exile. Renting isn't failure anymore, it's taxation without legacy. Every revolution that claimed to free people, capitalism, socialism, crypto, eventually circled back to the same truth. The real freedom lies in ownership, and ownership begins with land. Because every coin, every bond, every token ever created is just a promise that you'll be allowed to stay on the land. That's the original contract of civilization. Everything else is commentary. We can digitize money, tokenize assets, and build virtual worlds. But until we solve the question of who owns the earth itself, we're not evolving, we're looping. History doesn't reward those who invent new currencies. It rewards those who hold the deed. So the next time someone tells you Bitcoin is digital gold, remind them, gold only mattered because it came from land. And when the Wi-Fi drops, when the markets crash, when the servers go dark, it won't be blockchain that feeds you. It'll be the soil someone else owns. Land was the first asset, it will be the last. Because no matter how high we fly, how virtual we become, or how fast technology advances, they're not making any more of it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. You just have to know where to look.